A message from the dead. It was an ordinary evening when Sarah received the strange message, but as the hours passed, it became far from ordinary. She sat in her dimly lit apartment, fingers hovering over her phone, uncertain of whether to open the text. The message came from an unknown number, the words cryptic, but oddly familiar. "I'm watching you." The text appeared on her screen just after she had closed the door to her apartment, alone for the evening. Her first instinct was to delete it immediately and move on with her night, but something stopped her. She felt a chill run down her spine, as if something or someone was in the room with her. She glanced over her shoulder, but the apartment was empty. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but then another message appeared. "Don't worry, it's not your fault." Her heart skipped a beat. It was her sister's voice. Sarah stared at the screen, disbelief sweeping over her. Her sister, Lily, had died 2 months ago in a tragic car accident. The grief still hung heavy in Sarah's chest, and the pain of losing her was a constant ache. How could this be happening? Was someone playing a cruel joke on her? She was certain she had erased all contact with the people who could have accessed her sister's phone. Yet, somehow, the messages continued. The accident wasn't an accident. The blood drained from Sarah's face. She felt her hands tremble as she clutched her phone tightly. The words made no sense. Was this some kind of sick prank, or was something far more sinister happening? Her breath hitched as she remembered something her sister had said to her the week before the accident. They had been sitting in the living room, chatting about their childhood, when Lily had grown serious for a moment. "I have this strange feeling," Lily had said, eyes wide and fearful. "Like someone is watching me, like I'm being followed." At the time, Sarah had dismissed it as paranoia, a consequence of the stress Lily was under from work. But now, with these messages flooding her phone, those words took on an entirely different meaning. "You need to listen." The next text startled her. It was almost as if Lily's ghost was speaking directly to her, a warning, a plea. Find the truth. Look into his past. Sarah's mind raced. The only person who came to mind was Jake, the man who had been with Lily the night of the accident. He was the one who had called 911, his voice frantic, his words jumbled and panicked. He had been Lily's boyfriend for only a few months, but Sarah had never liked him. Something about him had always seemed off. Was it possible that Jake was somehow involved in what had happened? In a daze, Sarah grabbed her coat, determined to find Jake. She had to confront him, had to understand what had happened that night. The eerie sense of being watched never left her, and the feeling of coldness in the air seemed to intensify with every step she took out of her apartment. It was well past midnight when she arrived at Jake's apartment, an old building on the edge of town. The streetlights flickered as she approached the front door. She knocked 3 times, her heart pounding in her chest. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing Jake. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale as if he hadn't slept in days. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" His voice trembled. "I need to talk to you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to know the truth about what happened the night Lily died." Jake stepped back, his face suddenly blank. He looked over his shoulder nervously before glancing back at Sarah. "You should go home," he said, almost pleading. "Tell me what happened. I know you're hiding something. I know you're lying." A tense silence filled the air between them. Then Jake stepped aside, ushering her in. As she entered, Sarah noticed the room was dark, dimly lit by the glow of a single lamp in the corner. Papers were scattered across the floor, and the smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. "I didn't want to be here tonight," Jake muttered, looking uneasy. "I didn't want to remember what happened." "Tell me everything," Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with urgency. Jake hesitated, but eventually spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lily. She wasn't supposed to be driving that night. We were at a party. She'd had too much to drink, but she insisted on driving. I begged her not to, but she didn't listen. I tried to stop her, but she was determined. The crash," his voice faltered. "It wasn't an accident. There was someone else there, someone who made sure the accident happened." Sarah's stomach churned. "Who?" Jake glanced at her, his face twisted with fear. "I don't know. I didn't see their face, but I heard them. In the woods, just before the crash. They said something. They said Lily was a threat. They said she knew too much. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. Who would want to kill Lily, and why? Before she could ask more questions, Jake suddenly stood up, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to go. Now." "Why?" Sarah asked, confused. "There's no time. You're in danger too. They're watching you." Suddenly, the room grew colder, the shadows deepened, and a loud knock echoed through the door. Sarah froze, her heart racing. Jake's eyes darted nervously around the room. "Hide," he whispered, "quickly." Without thinking, Sarah crouched behind a large bookshelf. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she peered around the corner. The door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped inside. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach as she saw the face of the person who walked in. It wasn't Jake, it was someone much darker, someone she'd never seen before, with cold, calculating eyes. The stranger's gaze swept over the room, as if searching for something. They stopped at the spot where Sarah had been standing moments ago. Sarah held her breath, hoping they wouldn't find her. "Where is she?" the stranger growled. "I know she's here." Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of the door slamming shut. Jake had vanished, leaving Sarah alone in the dark room with the stranger. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The stranger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah. Your sister knew too much, and now so do you." Fear gripped her heart as the stranger slowly advanced toward her. "You're not leaving this place, not alive." With a burst of adrenaline, Sarah scrambled out from her hiding spot, running for the door. But before she could make it, the lights flickered and everything went black. This eerie tale leaves Sarah in a terrifying situation, discovering that her sister's death was no accident and that she's being hunted by someone who wants to silence her. The messages from the dead lead Sarah on a terrifying journey to uncover the truth, only to find herself facing an unimaginable danger.